The slam of the oak door was a gunshot in the heart of the storm. Outside, the heavens wept, but inside a different kind of cruelty reigned. Diana Black. 8 months pregnant, and clad in nothing but a thin silk nightgown, felt the cold marble of the porch beneath her bare feet, before the icy needles of rain began to assault her skin. Her husband, the man who had vowed to cherish her, stood silhouetted in the doorway, his face a mask of cold indifference. "You are nothing." He had hissed the words colder than the wind. "And you will have nothing." As she stood shivering in the deluge, clutching the swell of her belly, she was utterly alone. Or so he thought. What Gregory Dalton didn't know was that Diana wasn't just a penniless orphan. She had a secret, a brother she hadn't seen in 15 years. A brother who now commanded Ephorias from a skyscraper of steel and glass, and whose name was whispered with fear and reverence in boardrooms across the globe, Dmitry Volkov. The argument hadn't started with a bang, but with a slow, creeping poison that had been seeping into their marriage for months. It began the day Diana announced her pregnancy. Gregory Dalton, who had once showered her with affection, became distant, his smiles strained. His mother, Genevieve Dalton, a woman who wore her old money lineage like a suit of armor, had never approved of Diana. To Genevieve, Diana was a nobody, an architect with a pretty face and a mysterious, non-existent family, an unsuitable match for the heir to Dalton and Sons development. The poison turned to venom that Tuesday night. It was their 2nd anniversary. Diana had prepared a special dinner, but Greg came home late, smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers, and the faint, bitter scent of whiskey. "Where were you, Greg?" Diana asked, her voice trembling slightly as she stood by the cooling, untouched meal. "Out," he snapped, loosening his tie. "Business. You wouldn't understand. With Bianca Langley again." The name left a sour taste in her mouth. Bianca was the daughter of a construction magnate, a woman Genevieve paraded in front of Greg at every opportunity. Greg's face hardened. "What if I was... At least her family has a name, a legacy. What do you have, Diana?" "Who even are you? You showed up in this city with one suitcase and a portfolio. I gave you everything." "You gave me your love?" she whispered, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "You promised me a family. Our family." She placed a hand on her swollen belly. That was the moment the poison erupted. A phone call came. It was Genevieve. Greg put it on speaker, a cruel, deliberate act. "Is it done, Gregory?" Genevieve's voice was like ice chips in a glass. "Have you gotten rid of that complication?" Diana stared at her husband, her heart fracturing. "Complication?" Greg wouldn't meet her eyes. He just listened as his mother continued. "Bianca's father is ready to sign the merger papers, but only if the engagement is announced this week. A clean slate, Gregory. No messy attachments to a penniless orphan carrying a child that will only tarnish our name." "My baby, your grandchild, is a messy attachment." Diana's voice was barely audible. Greg finally looked at her, but the man she loved was gone. In his place was a stranger, his eyes reflecting his mother's cold ambition. "My mother is right. This was a mistake. I was blinded by a pretty face. The Daltons can't be saddled with this." He walked to the grand oak door and pulled it open, revealing the raging storm outside. Wind and rain lashed into the pristine foyer. "Get out." Diana stood frozen, the shock so profound it felt like a physical blow. "What, Greg? No. It's pouring. I have nowhere to go. I'm pregnant with your child. That's not my problem anymore, he said, his voice flat. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled her towards the door. She stumbled, trying to resist, but she was no match for his sudden, brutal strength. "Please, Greg, don't do this," she cried, her bare feet sliding on the wet marble. He shoved her over the threshold. She landed hard on her knees on the stone porch, the impact jarring her entire body. She looked up at him, her face streaked with rain and tears pleading with her eyes. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something in his expression, doubt, maybe even regret. But then his jaw tightened and his eyes went cold again. "The lawyer will contact you about the divorce," he said, as if discussing a business transaction. "Don't try to contact me or my family again." Then came the final soul-crushing slam of the door. The sound echoed the thunder sealing her fate. Diana Black, 8 months pregnant, was left in the raging storm, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart that had been systematically, brutally shattered. The wind howled around her, whipping her thin nightgown against her shivering body. Each drop of rain felt like a judgment. She was alone, discarded and terrified for the life of her unborn child. The world became a blur of swirling rain and flashing headlights. Diana huddled against the stone pillar of the Dalton mansion's gate, the wrought iron pressing cold against her back. The initial shock had given way to a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the chill of absolute despair. Her phone. He hadn't taken her phone. Her fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the small device in the pocket of the robe she'd managed to grab. The screen was slick with water. Who could she call? Her only friend in the city. Sophia Mendez was on a legal aid trip in South America, unreachable. She had no one else. The Daltons had made sure of that. They had slowly, methodically isolated her, convincing her that her friends were jealous, that her past was something to be ashamed of. She had believed them. She had traded everything for a love that turned out to be a lie. Her vision blurred. The cold was seeping into her bones, and a sharp cramp seized her lower abdomen. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of her misery. The baby. She scrolled through her contacts, a pathetic list of Greg's friends and business associates. Then she saw it. A name she hadn't called in over a decade. A name connected to a life she had long since buried. The contact was simply saved as Dima. It was a risk, a huge risk. He had told her to only call in a life-or-death emergency. This, she thought, as another cramp tightened its fist around her womb. Was it? With a trembling thumb, she pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. She was about to hang up, convinced it was a dead number, a ghost from the past. Then a voice. It was deeper than she remembered, clipped and precise with an undercurrent of authority that could command armies. "Diana." The sound of her name, spoken with a familiarity she hadn't heard in years, broke her. A sob tore from her throat. "Dima." She choked out her voice raw. I need help." "Where are you?" There was no surprise in his voice, no preamble, just a sharp, focused question. "I don't know. Outside Greg's house. He threw me out." The words tumbled out between sobs. "It's raining. The baby." The silence on the other end was terrifying, but it was not silence of ination. It was the silence of a predator locking onto its target. "Stay exactly where you are. Do not move. Do not talk to anyone. A car will be there in 10 minutes. It will be a black Mercedes sedan. The driver's name is Mr. Chen. He will take care of you. I am on my way." The line went dead. Diana didn't know if she could last 10 minutes. The world was tilting the streetlights, smearing into long, watery streaks. She curled into a tighter ball, her hands protectively wrapped around her belly, whispering to her unborn child. "It's okay. We're going to be okay. Mummy's sorry." It felt like an eternity, but it was exactly 9 minutes later when a sleek black Mercedes sedan pulled silently to the curb. It was a vehicle that exuded power and wealth, completely out of place on the rain-swept suburban street. A tall, impeccably dressed man of Asian descent, Mr. Chen, emerged with a large black umbrella. He moved with an unnerving efficiency, his face betraying no emotion as he took in her pathetic state. He knelt beside her, his movements smooth and respectful. "Ms. Black, I am Mr. Chen. Mr. Volkov sent me. Please let's get you out of the cold." He gently helped her to her feet, his touch firm but respectful. He wrapped a thick cashmere blanket, which he had produced from the car, around her shivering shoulders. As he guided her into the warm, leather-scented interior of the car, she glanced back at the mansion. A light was on in the upstairs window, the master bedroom. She could almost feel Greg's smug satisfaction, believing he had discarded her like trash. Inside the car, the warmth was a shock to her system. Mr. Chen handed her a bottle of water and spoke softly into a device she couldn't see. "The package is secure. Alert Dr. Evans. We are en route to the penthouse. ETA, 17 minutes. Penthouse, Mr. Volkov." Diana's mind, numb with cold and fear, struggled to connect the dots. The boy she remembered, the protective older brother who had been ripped from her life by a tragedy they never spoke of, had become a man who could summon a luxury car and a silent, efficient protector out of a stormy night with a single phone call. As the car sped silently through the city, leaving the manicured lawns and false promises of her old life behind, Diana drifted into an exhausted haze. She was safe for now. But as the car ascended the private elevator to a penthouse that overlooked the entire city, she knew her life had just taken a turn so sharp she couldn't possibly see what lay around the corner. All she knew was that the storm she had been thrown into was nothing compared to the one her brother was about to unleash. The elevator opened directly into a living space that was less an apartment and more a testament to minimalist power. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides revealed a panoramic, godlike view of the storm-lashed city below. The furniture was sparse, but exquisite. The art on the walls was museum quality, and the air was filled with a quiet, humming energy. Standing before the central window, a silhouette against the lightning, was a man. He turned as she entered, and Diana's breath caught in her throat. This was not the lanky, dark-haired teenager she remembered. This was Dmitri Volkov. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple grey t-shirt and dark trousers that did nothing to hide a physique honed by discipline. His face was all sharp angles and intelligent, watchful eyes, the same eyes she remembered, but now they held a chilling stillness, a look of calculated intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Dima," she whispered. He crossed the vast room in a few long strides. He didn't hug her immediately. Instead, he gently took her chin in his hand, his thumb brushing away a stray tear as his gaze swept over her, the drenched nightgown, the bare feet, the exhaustion etched onto her face, and finally the protective hand on her stomach. His jaw tightened and a muscle feathered along his cheek. It was the only sign of the cold fury brewing beneath the surface. "He did this to you," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, an indictment. All the strength Diana had clung to crumbled. She fell into him, her body shaking with sobs she could no longer contain. His arms came around her, strong and sure, enveloping her in a safety she hadn't felt since she was a child. He held her, letting her cry, murmuring quiet words in the Russian of their childhood, a language of secrets and shared sorrows. A woman in a crisp uniform, a doctor, appeared as if from nowhere. "Mr. Volkov, if I may." Dmitri guided Diana to a plush sofa. Dr. Evans was kind and efficient, checking Diana's vitals and the baby's heartbeat with a portable ultrasound machine. The rhythmic thump-thump filled the silent room, a sound of profound hope in the midst of despair. "The baby is strong," Dr. Evans announced with a reassuring smile. "But you're severely dehydrated and your blood pressure is high due to stress. You need rest, warmth, and nourishment. Immediately, Mr. Minister." Chen and the doctor helped Diana to a guest suite that was larger than her entire first apartment. A warm bath was already drawn. Fresh, soft clothes were laid out on the bed. A light meal was waiting. Every detail had been anticipated. After she was settled in a comfortable bed, Dmitri appeared at the door, a mug of herbal tea in his hands. He sat in a chair beside her, the silence stretching between them, thick with 15 years of unspoken history. "They told me you were adopted by a loving family," Diana said softly, breaking the quiet. "A history professor and his wife in a small town." Dmitri's smile was thin and humorless. They were good people. But they died in a car accident when I was 17. I was put back into the system." Diana gasped. "Dima, I never knew." "It's not something I advertised," he said, his gaze distant. "I aged out, worked 3 jobs, put myself through business school at night. I learned early on that the world only respects one thing, power. So I decided I would acquire so much of it that no one could ever hurt me or anyone I cared about again." He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. "I should have reached out sooner. I kept tabs on you always. I saw you graduate, saw your first commission, saw you get married. You looked happy. I didn't want to complicate your life with my past." "Complicated, Dima. I thought I was alone all these years." "You were never alone," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "And now, that man, Gregory Dalton, and his mother, they will learn what it means to touch what is mine." He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. "I want you to tell me everything, Diana. Every slight, every cruel word, every time his mother looked at you like you were dirt on her shoe. I want the name of his company, his business partners, his bank. I want to know what he values, what he fears, what he dreams of. Because I'm going to take it all away from him." Diana hesitated. Part of her, the part that had loved Greg, shrank from the sheer ruthlessness in her brother's voice. "Dima, I just want to be safe. I don't want—" He turned to face her, his expression unyielding. "They left you pregnant with their heir to potentially die in a storm, Diana. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about justice. It's about creating a world where they can never, ever harm you or your child again. They built their house on a foundation of pride and money. I will bulldoze it to the ground. They will be ruined. They won't just be poor. They will be irrelevant. Their name, the name they value so much, will be a synonym for disgrace." He knelt by her bed, taking her hand. His was warm and strong. You don't have to do anything. Just rest. Heal. Focus on that little one. He nodded towards her belly. Let me handle the Daltons. Let your big brother finally do what he was meant to do, protect his family. Looking into his steel-grey eyes, Diana saw the same protective boy who had once fought off bullies for her in the orphanage playground. He was bigger now, more powerful, and infinitely more dangerous. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like the sister of a wolf, and she knew with a certainty that calmed her trembling soul that the hunt was about to begin. The Dalton family woke up the next morning to a world that was on the surface exactly as they had left it. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clean, rain-washed city. Greg felt a pang of something not quite guilt, more like a nagging inconvenience, as he noticed Diana's car was still in the driveway. He made a mental note to have it towed. Genevieve called, her voice triumphant, to inform him that the preliminary merger agreement with Langley Construction was ready to be signed. Everything was proceeding according to their master plan. They were celebrating their victory completely oblivious to the fact that they were already under siege. Miles away in the top-floor command center of Volkov Industries, a place that looked more like a NORAD control room than a corporate office, Dmitry Volkov was presiding over a very different kind of meeting. Dalton & Sons Development. Dmitry said, his voice calm, as he addressed his core team of analysts and corporate strategists. A holographic image of the company's portfolio floated in the center of the room. Assets of approximately 90 million, primarily in mid-range residential and commercial construction. Their reputation is solid but dated. Their debt-to-asset ratio is their weakness, 40%, leveraged to the hilt for their flagship project, the Westgate Tower. Mr. Chen pointed to a section of the hologram. The Westgate Tower is their big play to enter the luxury market. They've sunk nearly all their liquid capital into it. The project is already slightly behind schedule and over budget. Furthermore, their primary concrete supplier is a company called Solid Form Materials. Dmitry raised an eyebrow. And what do we know about Solid Form? A young, sharp-eyed analyst named Keisha spoke up. Run by a man named Frank Miller. He has a gambling problem. Our financial forensics team has flagged several unusual payments from his accounts to offshore entities. More importantly, we've cross-referenced their supply chain. For the last 6 months, they've been sourcing a significant percentage of their aggregate from an unaccredited quarry in Mexico, known for substandard limestone content. A slow, predatory smile touched Dmitry's lips. Substandard aggregate means weaker concrete. Weaker concrete means structural integrity issues down the line. It's a ticking time bomb. Indeed, sir, Mr. Chen confirmed. But it would take years for any major issues to surface. Proving it now would be difficult without an invasive inspection. We won't need to prove it, Dmitry said. We just need to plant the seed of doubt. The Daltons are relying on selling the Westgate residential units off-plan to finance the final stages of construction. We need to dry up that demand. He turned to his head of strategic communications. I want a slow, subtle media campaign. Start with anonymous blog posts on architectural forums. Raise questions about the sourcing of materials in new luxury builds. Nothing specific, just general concerns. Then have one of our subsidiary real estate analysis firms release a report on the hidden dangers of fast-tracked construction projects. Let's create an atmosphere of anxiety around the very market the Daltons are trying to enter. He then turned to his acquisitions chief. Dalton & Sons has a major loan renewal coming up in 3 months with Sterling National Bank. I want you to buy a controlling interest in the small regional bank that holds their secondary line of credit, Keystone Mutual. Do it quietly through a series of shell corporations. When their primary loan comes up for review, Sterling National will see that their secondary lender has been acquired by an unknown entity. They'll get nervous. They'll tighten the terms. The siege was silent, invisible, and devastatingly effective. Within 2 weeks, the buzz around the Westgate Tower shifted. Wealthy buyers, once eager to purchase units, started getting cold feet. Vague rumors about construction concerns in the luxury sector began to circulate at country clubs and charity galas. Sales stalled. Greg Dalton, feeling the pressure, tried to fast-track the next phase of construction, which only put more strain on his finances. He went to Keystone Mutual for a small bridge loan to cover the shortfall, only to be told that due to a recent change in ownership, all commercial lending was under review. He was stunned. Then came the first direct blow. Dalton & Sons was the front-runner for a lucrative city contract to develop a new municipal complex. It was a project that would have secured their finances for the next 5 years. At the 11th hour, a previously unknown company, Apex Urban Solutions, submitted a bid that was 20% lower with better financing and a guaranteed faster completion date. Apex, of course, was a newly created subsidiary of Volkov Industries. The contract was snatched from right under the Daltons' noses. Greg was furious and bewildered. It felt like the universe was conspiring against him. He and Genevieve sat in their drawing room, the celebratory champagne from 2 weeks ago now tasting bitter. "It has to be her." Genevieve spat her face a mask of fury. "That little tramp must be doing something to sabotage us." "How?" Greg shot back, pacing the expensive rug. "She has nothing. No money, no connections. She's probably living in some shelter. What could she possibly do?" They were blind. They were looking for a street-level brawl when they were being systematically dismantled by an airstrike from 80 stories up. They couldn't conceive of an enemy like Dmitry Volkov, a man who didn't just play the game, he owned the entire board. And from his penthouse, watching the stock price of Dalton & Sons begin its slow, steady decline, Dmitry knew this was only the beginning. He was constricting his grip slowly, cutting off their oxygen, and soon they would begin to thrash. The pressure mounted not day by day, but hour by hour. The silent siege had begun to create very audible cracks in the Dalton family's pristine facade. The Westgate Tower, once their symbol of future prosperity, now loomed over the city like a monument to their impending failure. Construction had slowed to a crawl. The stalled unit sales meant cash flow was a nightmare. Greg was spending his days in frantic meetings with bankers, and his nights staring at the ceiling, the numbers churning in his head. His relationship with his new fiancée, Bianca Langley, also began to fray. Bianca was accustomed to a certain lifestyle, one of effortless luxury. She had signed on to be the wife of a titan of industry, not the partner of a stressed-out contractor struggling to make payroll. "What do you mean we're postponing the trip to Monaco?" she demanded one evening, looking up from a jewelry catalogue. "The yacht show is next month." "We can't afford it, Bianca," Greg mumbled, rubbing his temples. "The Langley merger hasn't been finalized, and we're having some temporary liquidity issues." "Temporary?" Bianca's laugh was sharp. "Daddy says your company is starting to look like a bad investment. He's thinking of pulling out of the merger altogether." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The Langley deal was their only lifeline. Without it, they would drown. Genevieve, for her part, channeled her anxiety into a venomous obsession with Diana. She hired a private investigator to find her convinced that Diana was the source of all their problems. The investigator came back empty-handed. It was as if Diana Black had vanished from the face of the earth. There were no shelter records, no credit card activity, no new apartment leases. To the world, she had ceased to exist. This only fueled Genevieve's paranoia. Meanwhile, Diana was anything but gone. She was thriving. In the serene, secure environment of Dimitri's penthouse, she was rediscovering herself. The fear and heartbreak were slowly being replaced by a quiet, simmering anger and a powerful sense of purpose. She spent her days in Dimitri's vast library, devouring books on business finance and corporate law. She had designed their prison. Now she wanted to understand the mechanics of its demolition. She also started designing again. With state-of-the-art software and unlimited resources, she began sketching out plans for a new project, a foundation that would build beautiful, sustainable, and affordable housing for single mothers. It was a way to channel her pain into something positive, something the Daltons, with their obsession with opulent, soulless towers, could never comprehend. Her pregnancy was progressing beautifully. Under the care of Dr. Evans, she was healthy and strong. She and Dimitri fell into a comfortable routine. They would have dinner together every night, talking for hours about their lost childhood, their separate lives, and now their shared future. Diana began to see the man behind the ruthless CEO, the brother who remembered she was allergic to strawberries and who would quietly place a cashmere throw over her when she fell asleep on the sofa. One evening, as they looked over the city, Diana placed a hand on her belly. The baby kicked. "He's strong," she said, a soft smile on her face. Dimitri watched her, his usually guarded expression softening. "He comes from strong stock." He paused, then said, "The Daltons are beginning to panic. Greg has been trying to liquidate some personal assets, but our financial division has been discouraging potential buyers. He's trapped." "Does he ever ask about me?" Diana asked the question, escaping before she could stop it. Dimitri's gaze sharpened. "He called your old number, left a message, not of apology, of anger, accusing you of sabotaging him, demanding you show yourself." Diana felt a cold knot in her stomach. "What did you do?" "I have the recording, if you wish to hear it," he said simply. "But I have also ensured that he can no longer contact you. That number now redirects to a deadline." He had built a fortress around her, and the Daltons were outside, screaming into the void. The final crack in their facade appeared at the annual Builders Guild charity ball, the pinnacle of the city's real estate social calendar. The Daltons had always held a place of honor at the event. This year, they were seated at a table in the back near the kitchen. Old friends and associates offered curt nods instead of warm handshakes. The whispers followed them everywhere. The keynote speaker for the evening was a surprise, announced only as a visionary new force in global investment. When Dmitri Volkov took the stage, a collective gasp went through the room. He was a legend, a recluse who never attended such events. His presence was an earthquake. Greg and Genevieve stared, mouths agape. They knew who he was, of course. Everyone did. But they had no idea of his connection to their lives. Dimitri's speech was brief, elegant, and brutal. He spoke of a new era of corporate responsibility, of a market that would no longer tolerate companies that prioritized greed over integrity, and that built their futures on rotten foundations. He never mentioned the Daltons by name. He didn't have to. Every eye in the room shifted to their table. He was putting a target on their backs, marking them as the old guard, the dinosaurs facing extinction. As he finished his speech to thunderous applause, His cool grey eyes swept the room and locked onto Greg's. For a fleeting second, Greg felt a chill of pure terror, a primal fear he couldn't explain. It was the feeling of a mouse being stared at by a hawk. He didn't know why, but he knew that this powerful, untouchable man was his enemy. The siege was no longer silent. The first cannon had just been fired. The Builders Guild charity ball was not just a humiliation for the Daltons. It was a public execution. Dmitri Volkov's speech, elegant and devastatingly precise, had painted a target on their backs. In the cutthroat world of high-stakes real estate, it was a signal to the sharks that there was blood in the water. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. The next morning, the feature article, "Cracks in the Concrete Kingdom," hit the city's leading financial journal. It was a masterpiece of innuendo and carefully sourced, expert concerns, and it acted like a detonator. Before the stock market had been open for an hour, Dalton and Sons stock was in free fall. Greg sat in his leather office chair, the same chair his father and grandfather had occupied, and watched the numbers on his screen glow a sickening, relentless red. The phone, which once rang with lucrative offers, was now a source of dread. Each call a fresh assault from a panicked investor or a nervous creditor. The killing blow came not from a stranger, but from Bianca's father, Harrison Langley. There was no courtesy, no sympathy in his voice. "The deal is off, Gregory," he said, his tone as cold and hard as granite. "My family doesn't attach its name to sinking ships. You're a liability." The click of the phone hanging up was the sound of his last lifeline being severed. Panic, a greasy clawing thing, took hold of Greg. He was trapped. His world, built on the illusion of prestige and the assumption of future wealth, was imploding. That evening he stayed late at the office, long after his demoralized staff had departed. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, he began to shred documents, his movements frantic and clumsy. Financial reports, supplier contracts, loan agreements. Anything that might look incriminating was fed into the machine, a desperate, futile attempt to erase the evidence of his own recklessness. He was no longer a captain of industry. He was just a cornered man, making all the wrong moves. Miles above the city, Dmitri watched the Dalton Empire's death throes with the detached calm of a chess grandmaster observing a predictable endgame. The financial ruin was nearly complete, the social disgrace absolute. But it wasn't enough. He wanted to salt the earth of their legacy, to ensure nothing could ever grow from its poisoned soil again. He wanted a final definitive stroke that would not only imprison them, but would expose the rotten core of their character to the entire world. And for that, he needed the one person who knew their secrets best. He found Diana not in the command center, but in the serene, light-filled nursery she had meticulously designed. The scent of lavender and fresh linen filled the air. She was sitting in a rocking chair, her hands resting on the gentle curve of her belly, a look of profound peace on her face. This room was her sanctuary, a world away from the vengeance being wrought in her name. Dmitri entered quietly, his presence a stark contrast to the room's softness. "It's time, Diana," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The foundation is crumbling. I need you to help me push the walls down." He unrolled a set of large, heavy blueprints onto a nearby table. Diana's breath caught. They were the architectural plans for the Westgate Tower. For a moment, she recoiled. Those pages represented the pinnacle of her life with Greg, a time of shared dreams and whispered late-night conversations. Now they felt like relics from a tomb, artifacts of a grand deception. "I've had my forensics team go over every inch of their financials," Dmitri explained, his voice pulling her back to the present. But fraud can be hidden, numbers can be manipulated. A building, however, a building doesn't lie. You know his work, you know his mind, his shortcuts, the pressures he was under. Look at them, Diana. Look at them not as his wife, but as the brilliant architect you are. Find the lie. Hesitantly, Diana approached the table. Her fingers, long and elegant, traced the familiar lines of the tower's facade. The memories were a painful whisper, Greg boasting about the panoramic views, their arguments over the lobby's marble supplier. She pushed the personal pain aside, forcing herself to see the building for what it was. A complex equation of steel, glass, and concrete. Her professional instincts, sharp and honed, took over. For over an hour she studied the plans, her focus absolute. She cross-referenced material lists with structural load calculations. Her mind a rapid-fire calculator of stress and tolerance. She remembered fragmented conversations, Greg complaining about the rising cost of high-grade steel reinforcements for the upper floors. She recalled a tense meeting with a supplier where he had aggressively renegotiated the price of aggregate. At the time, she had admired his business acumen. Now she saw it through a different lens. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the detailed specifications for the concrete mix. Her finger stopped hovering over a small, dense block of text. A cold dread, sharp and certain, washed over her. "Here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's right here." Dmitri moved to her side, his gaze intense. "What is it?" "It's the PSI rating," she said, tapping the notation. "Pounds per square inch. It's the measure of the concrete's compressive strength. For the core support columns from the 40th to the 60th floor, he's specified a 6,000 PSI mix." She looked up at her brother, her eyes blazing with a mixture of horror and discovery. Dima for a skyscraper of this height and design, especially in a city with even minor seismic codes, the absolute minimum industry standard is 8,000 PSI. He might have even needed 10,000. The implication was staggering. Using the lower grade mix would have saved him millions. Diana continued, her voice gaining strength. Enough to cover his budget overruns and make the project appear profitable to his investors. But it's a catastrophic risk. The building's core is fundamentally compromised. Over time, with stress and environmental factors, it could fail. She finally understood. He wasn't just a cheat and a liar. His greed had made him willing to endanger thousands of lives. He wouldn't. She breathed, the last vestige of her old affection dying on her lips. He couldn't be that reckless. He was that desperate. Dmitri corrected her, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. This was the checkmate. He turned to Mr. Chen, who had been waiting a silent shadow by the door. "We have what we need. Prepare the package for our source at the City Journal and place an anonymous call to the head of the city's building commission. Suggest they run an immediate unscheduled core sample test on the Westgate Tower. The tip is from a conscientious construction worker who fears for his safety." The call was made. The gears of bureaucracy, greased by the high-profile nature of the project and the existing negative press, turned with surprising speed. The next morning, a team of city inspectors, armed with a court order, sealed the Westgate site and began drilling deep into the building's concrete heart. 2 days later, the bombshell exploded. Diana and Dmitri watched it unfold on the immense news screen in the penthouse. A special report interrupted the afternoon programming. The anchor's face was grim. "Breaking news," he announced. "The city has ordered an immediate and permanent halt to all construction at the Westgate Tower, citing critical structural deficiencies that pose a significant and immediate threat to public safety." The report was devastating. An engineering expert explained in layman's terms the criminal recklessness of using substandard concrete in a building of that scale. The district attorney announced a full-scale criminal investigation. The story was no longer about financial ruin. It was about a massive, life-threatening public fraud. Then the live feed switched to the Dalton & Sons headquarters. They watched in high definition as a stunned Gregory Dalton was led out of his office in handcuffs, his face a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. He looked utterly pathetic, a little boy lost in the ruins of his own making. Minutes later, the cameras found Genevieve at her mansion, her attempt to flee thwarted. Her aristocratic composure finally shattered. She became a cornered animal, shrieking obscenities at the reporters as she was guided into the back of a police car. Diana stood before the screen, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She felt Alexander kick gently a small life, oblivious to the destruction of another. There was no elation, no triumphant cheer. There was only the quiet, somber finality of justice. The fire of her rage had long since burned out. In its place was a calm, cool certainty. The Daltons' legacy was now a permanent scar on the city's skyline. The game was over. It was checkmate. The fall of the House of Dalton was not a quiet affair. It was a media spectacle, a feeding frenzy for the 24-hour news cycle. From the safety and serenity of Dimitri's penthouse, Diana watched the story unfold in detached fragments. She saw Gregory, her estranged husband, his face a ghastly shade of pale, performing a perp walk in a rumpled suit, his eyes wide with a terror that seemed to finally comprehend his new reality. She saw Genevieve spitting fury at reporters, her carefully constructed mask of aristocratic superiority cracking to reveal the ugly, desperate woman beneath. The Dalton name, once their most prized asset, was now irrevocably tarnished, a synonym for greed and criminal negligence. The legal proceedings were a brutal, methodical dismantling. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence from the fraudulent financial records, Dimitri's team had anonymously leaked to the damning results of the concrete core samples. Gregory's high-priced lawyers could do little more than mitigate the damage. He accepted a plea bargain, trading a full confession for a slightly reduced sentence. 10 years in federal prison. It felt like a lifetime, and not nearly long enough. Genevieve, ensnared in the web of financial fraud she had helped weave, was stripped of every asset, the mansion, the art, the jewels, and sentenced to 3 years. They were left with nothing but the weight of their own disgrace. Diana felt no surge of triumph as the verdicts were read. There was no joy, no satisfying thirst for vengeance quenched. There was only a profound, quiet sense of an ending. A chapter violent and painful had been slammed shut. Her gaze drifted from the television screen to the window where the city skyline was painted with the soft colors of dawn. Her attention, her very soul, was already focused on a new beginning. The echoes of the Daltons' ruin were fading, replaced by the insistent, powerful rhythm of a new life stirring within her. A few months later, in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, that new life made its grand entrance. The world narrowed to a primal sequence of pain effort and breathless anticipation. Dimitri was a steadfast, if slightly terrified, presence in the waiting room, while Sophia Mendez, having returned from her trip and been brought up to speed, held Diana's hand, her calm voice a lifeline. And then a cry, a powerful, life-affirming wail that cut through the exhaustion and filled the room with undeniable proof of a miracle. They placed him in her arms, a tiny, perfect being, with a tuft of dark hair and his mother's deep, searching eyes. Diana looked at him, and the last vestiges of the woman who had shivered in the rain vanished forever. In her place was a mother, fierce and protective. This small, warm weight against her chest was her world now. He was the future. He was innocence. He was a promise. "What's his name?" the nurse asked softly. Diana looked at her son, her voice clear and strong. "Alexander. Alexander Black." The name was a declaration. There would be no link to the Dalton legacy, no shadow of their name to fall upon his future. He was a Black, the start of a new lineage, one that would be defined not by wealth or status, but by resilience and love. When she brought Alexander home to the penthouse, Dmitri was waiting. The formidable CEO, a man who could command boardrooms and move markets with a single word, looked utterly undone by the tiny bundle in the carrier. He approached with a reverence Diana had never seen in him, his hands hovering uncertainly. "Can I?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Diana gently passed his nephew into his arms. Dmitri held Alexander with a surprising tenderness, his large frame seeming to cradle the baby's fragility. He looked down at the sleeping infant's face, his own features softening in a way that erased the ruthless businessman and revealed the protective older brother, the devoted uncle. "He's perfect, Diana," Dmitri whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He is our family, our future." In that moment, holding the next generation of their small, fractured family, a silent vow passed between them. This child would know only safety, love, and strength. The ghosts of their past and hers would never touch him. The following year was one of profound transformation. While the skeletal frame of the Westgate Tower stood as a condemned monument to hubris on the other side of town, a different kind of structure was beginning to rise. Diana, pouring her energy and talent into the Black Housing Initiative, was no longer just an architect. She was a creator of hope. She spent her days not in a penthouse, but in a bustling office and on muddy construction sites. She was decisive, passionate, and deeply involved in every detail. Her design philosophy was the antithesis of everything the Daltons stood for. Where they had prized cold opulence, she designed for warm community. Where they built walls to keep people out, she designed open courtyards to bring people together. Her project was for single mothers, for families starting over a sanctuary, built with integrity from the ground up. One afternoon, a letter arrived at her office. The return address was a federal correctional facility. The handwriting on the envelope was Greg's. For a moment, her heart seized with an old familiar pang of anxiety. She almost threw it away, but a deeper, calmer part of her knew she needed to face this final ghost. She slit it open with a letter opener, her hands steady. The letter was a rambling, pathetic litany of excuses. He blamed his mother's ambition, the pressure of his legacy. And most despicably, he blamed Diana's mysterious past for his own paranoia and weakness. It was pages of self-pity devoid of any genuine remorse. The final paragraph was a desperate plea for her to write to his parole board, to send money to somehow salvage the life he had so thoroughly destroyed. He still saw her as a tool to be used. He had learned nothing. Diana read the last line and felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was a distant scar. All that remained was a profound sense of pity for this small, broken man who would forever be a prisoner of his own character flaws. She stood up, walked to the heavy-duty office shredder, and fed the letter into it. The machine whirred to life, chewing the desperate, manipulative words into meaningless strips of confetti. It was a quiet, deliberate ceremony. The last thread connecting her to Gregory Dalton had been severed. A year to the day after Alexander was born, Diana stood on the construction site of her first completed building. The scent of fresh paint and new wood hung in the air. Alexander, now a curious toddler, with an unsteady walk held tightly to her hand, his eyes wide with wonder at the bustling scene. Dmitri stood beside them, no longer the dark angel of vengeance, but simply a proud uncle in a sharp suit. He watched as Alexander took a few wobbly steps toward a patch of newly laid sod before tumbling harmlessly onto the soft grass, letting out a delighted giggle. "You built this, Diana," Dmitri said, his voice filled with a deep, quiet admiration as he looked from the beautiful, welcoming building to his sister. "They tried to throw you away to make you nothing, and you took their ugliness and built something beautiful from it." Diana smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. She picked up her son, settling his warm weight on her hip. "They built their empire on a foundation of lies and weak concrete," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I wanted to build mine on something stronger." She looked at the building, a place that would soon be filled with the laughter of children and the hopes of mothers rebuilding their lives. She looked at her brother, her anchor in the storm, the family she thought she had lost forever. And she looked at her son, her own beautiful, tangible future. The storm had been terrible, but it had washed away a life that was never truly hers, clearing the ground for something real, something true, something she had built, not just with her own 2 hands, but with a heart that had been broken and had healed stronger than before. And so Diana Black's story comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that the darkest storms often precede the brightest dawns. Thrown away and left with nothing, she didn't just survive. She rose from the ashes of a broken life to build a new legacy. Not one of cold, empty towers, but one of hope, strength, and community. Her journey from a shivering victim on a cold porch to a powerful creator of her own destiny shows us that our true worth is never defined by those who discard us, but by the strength we find within ourselves and the love of the family we choose. If Diana's story of strength and justice moved you, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to let us know you want more stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own resilience. And most importantly, click subscribe and ring that notification bell. That way you won't miss a single one of our next stories about justice served and incredible comebacks. Thank you for listening.